Ward 7 sat on the medical isolation level of Vesper Ring, a rotating orbital station that hung above a red dwarf like a pale metal halo. Dr. Selah Vane ran that ward, and on most days her job was simple to describe and hard to do. She was the senior physician for quarantine, trauma intake, and anything the rest of the station wanted kept behind locked glass until someone decided what it was. That morning, before her shift had properly settled, she stood outside the main chamber and watched an unknown human male sleep under low white light. He had been brought in less than an hour earlier from the wreck field beyond the station. Salvage crews had pulled him from a fractured service pod, drifting beside the broken frame of a warship with no active registry. No name had come with him. No clean record had come with him either. A line on Selah's wrist display told her what already bothered her. The sedation curve had dropped again. Neri, her closest medical assistant, looked up from the bedside console. He had already stripped off the outer recovery gloves, and the silence on his face told her he did not trust the numbers. The sedative should still be holding, he said. It isn't. Selah moved to the bed and checked the patient for herself. He was lean, dark-haired, and marked by the kind of old scars that said he had lived in hard places for a long time. New damage crossed his shoulder and ribs. Nothing looked impossible, but everything looked expensive to survive. The console displayed a line that read, "Metabolic suppression falling below forecast range." "It is the third drop in 17 minutes, Neri said. Either the dosage was wrong from intake, or he is clearing it too fast. He was in open debris for nearly 4 hours, Selah said. Shock changes the numbers. Neri did not argue. He only glanced toward the ceiling speaker, where an amber light waited for an incoming channel. They both knew who would call next. The speaker clicked on. "Dr. Vane, this is internal security operations. Confirm the patient remains contained." Before Selah could answer, a new voice replaced the first one. It was cooler, flatter, and more practiced. "Dr. Vane, Deputy Director Kale Orris speaking. The human recovered from the wreck field is to be transferred to security control immediately. Your team is to stabilize and release." Selah placed 2 fingers on the patient's neck and counted the pulse for herself. It was stronger than it should have been, and far too steady for a man who had nearly died outside the station. "On what medical grounds?" she asked. "He arrived hypothermic, oxygen-starved, and chemically unstable. He is not leaving this bed." She adjusted the scanner above him and watched the image wash across his chest, throat, and skull. The scan changed nothing about the feeling already growing in her. Security always had a point. The question was whether it had the right one. Outside the chamber, the ward remained calm. Air recyclers hummed. Soft transport carts moved through their tracks, and the station's rotation gave the floor a clean sense of gravity that almost felt natural if a person worked there long enough. Selah had worked there long enough to notice what other people stopped noticing. Under the floor, under the walls, under the calm voices, Vesper Ring always carried a faint vibration that reminded her the whole world around them was machinery pretending to be stable. On most days, that made her careful. On this day, it made her feel watched. She reopened the intake file. Recovery location, outer wreck perimeter, no tag, no match in civilian transit, no match in military transit, partial chemical residue from emergency pod foam, and trace compounds not listed in any Vesper Ring inventory. Selah looked at Neri. "Increase observation, not dosage. I want to know what changes first." He moved to the side cart and prepared a narrow injector while Selah checked the patient's eyes with a pen light. They reacted, but not in the clean, delayed rhythm she expected. It was as if his body had accepted the drug just long enough to survive transport, then had begun forcing its own way back. Within minutes, the rest of the ward team had gathered in the staff ring outside the chamber glass. Laura, the monitoring specialist, brought up layered scans, and Hesman from trauma support compared his blood chemistry against known human entries from Alliance Medical Archives. None of them looked comfortable. "It rises where it should fall," Laura said. "Then it falls where it should spike. I kept thinking the feed was delayed, but it isn't." She tapped a cluster of markers on the display. His body temperature recovered too fast after intake. That might happen with aggressive support, but not this fast. Neri finally said the thing the room had been circling. We do not actually understand what this human body is doing. Sela folded her arms and kept her eyes on the chamber. Then we do what medicine is for. We observe, we keep him alive, and we do not hand him to armed people because the chart is inconvenient. She walked back into the chamber for one more close reading before the next security call came. The pressure line in his left arm still fed fluids. Bruising had spread along the skin, and yet his hand stayed loose instead of clenched. Even unconscious, he looked less absent than hidden. She leaned toward Neri. When he wakes, if he wakes, no crowd. No raised voices. No sudden lights. I want the room quiet. Neri gave a small nod, but before he could answer, the human's eyelids shifted. The movement was slight, then stronger, and in 2 breaths his eyes were open. Not drifting, not panicked, awake. His gaze moved across the room with startling speed. Ceiling light, chamber door, monitor, tray cart, Neri Sela. Sela kept her voice level. You are in medical isolation on Vesper Ring. You are recovered from debris. You are injured, and you are safe for the moment. The human's breathing sharpened, but he did not thrash. He flexed one wrist against the restraint, not fighting it, only measuring it. His voice came out rough from dryness and sedation. Who holds this ward? This ward is under my authority, Sela said. Dr. Sela Vane. The answer changed him. Not by much, but enough. A small tightening at the jaw. A hard shift in the eyes, as if one unseen equation had just resolved into something worse. Neri stepped half a pace closer to the monitor. You should stay still. The human turned his head toward him with such quick precision that Neri stopped speaking at once. Sela stepped slightly between them. You are not in condition to stand. He looked toward the sealed glass and then toward the sidewall. There are 2 exits, he said. Main seal and staff access. He was mapping the room already. Even half sedated, he was not waking like an ordinary patient. There are, Sela said, and security wants you transferred. His lips parted, but whatever answer he meant to give either was not ready or could not push through the remains of the drug. He looked past her to the door, then back to her again. If they come first, he said, lock this ward. His breathing went uneven. The strength went out of his neck, and within seconds the sedation dragged him back down again. It did not look like sleep. It looked like being pulled underwater against resistance. The ward lights dimmed for a fraction of a second, then steadied. A soft tone sounded from the corridor, and Laura's voice came through the chamber speaker from the outer station ring. Doctor, security teams have entered the medical level. They are not waiting for the transfer window. Another chime sounded at once. This one came from the system access board. Several permissions on the ward map shifted from blue to gray. Pharmacy override limited, corridor camera routing limited, outer door priority elevated to security command. Sela felt the shape of the situation settle around her. The patient had never been a transfer problem. He had been a target from the beginning. Deputy Director Oris came onto the channel again. Dr. Vane, stand down. This is your final notice. Open Ward 7 and release the patient. Sela looked through the glass at the human lying under the white lights. He was anonymous on paper, injured in body, and somehow important enough that armed officers were locking down a medical level to take him before he could fully wake. That was not routine. That was retrieval. She touched the control panel beside the chamber and brought up the local lock sequence. A red confirmation line appeared over her hand. The console displayed a line that read, Ward 7 internal quarantine lock engaged. Across the map, the chamber seals thickened from yellow to red. The staff ring closed, and the outer corridor doors sealed in sequence one after another, cutting the ward off from the rest of the level. On the far side of the glass, the sleeping human did not move, but the entire room around him had changed. It was no longer just a place of treatment. It was now a place someone intended to breach. Sela met Neri's stare, then looked through the ring glass at the rest of her team. Some looked frightened, one looked angry, and all of them understood. We keep him alive, she said. We hold this ward. Until I know who is trying to take him and why, no one enters. Ward 7 went quiet after the first lock sequence. Not calmer, only quieter. The staff lowered their voices, and every sound from the corridor beyond the sealed doors carried too clearly through the metal, as if the station itself were listening. A few minutes later, the patient came back up again. This time the rise was slower, but only by seconds. His eyes opened, fixed first on the ceiling light, then moved to the far wall, the door, the monitor, the tray cart, and finally to Sela. He still looked pale from blood loss, and his left shoulder was bound tight beneath a fresh pressure wrap, but nothing in his face suggested confusion. He looked like a man waking on hostile ground and measuring how bad it had become. Sela stood beside the bed with Neri on her left and Laura beyond the chamber glass. "Do not try to stand," she said. "You are still recovering." "You said security seal the level?" he asked. Neri almost answered, but Sela cut in first. "You are in Ward 7 on Vesper Ring. Internal security wants you transferred. I want answers before that happens." The human looked at the restraint on his right wrist, then at the fluid line in his arm. "How long was I under this time?" "Long enough to stay alive," Sela said. "Not long enough to explain anything." His breathing deepened once, then steadied again. Sela watched how much effort it took him to remain alert. Whatever made him difficult to sedate did not make him invincible. It only meant he had to fight for consciousness the way other patients fought to stay awake after shock. He let out something that might have been a dry laugh if he had more strength. "That depends on who wrote the file." Sela watched him closely, then explained the file. He looked at her for a long second. "The part that gets people removed from medical care and handed to men with rifles." "Why would security storm a medical ward for one injured survivor?" she asked. "Because they will not come through the main seal first if they think I am ready for them." Neri glanced at the chamber display. "You think security is going to breach a medical ward?" The human met his gaze. "I think they will do what their orders require. Your mistake is thinking those orders still belong to station safety." Sela stayed with the important part. "Your name?" He hesitated for only a moment. "Jonah Vali." The name landed in the room and changed nothing and everything at once. Sela had never heard it before, but the way he gave it told her he was choosing his words carefully. "What happened in the rec field?" she asked. Jonah stared past her for a second, not to avoid the answer, but as if he had to pull it through damaged memory. "Metal breaking in slow rotation," he said. "A service pod that should never have launched. Heat alarms. Then vacuum silence." He shut his eyes for one breath and opened them again. "I remember enough to know the ship did not die by accident." The chamber speaker clicked alive before Sela could ask more. "Dr. Vane," Oris said. "Open Ward 7. This is the final station request before security action." Jonah's eyes snapped fully open. Neri froze, and Laura beyond the glass turned sharply toward the audio panel. Sela answered without taking her eyes off Jonah. "On what authority?" Oris did not hesitate. "The human male in Ward 7 is a restricted war asset under emergency retrieval classification. You are not authorized to question transfer." That phrasing hit Sela harder than the threat. "Va asset, not patient, not witness, not survivor." She stepped out of the chamber and into the outer control ring because she needed distance from Jonah's eyes and a larger board in front of her. Laura already had the access map up on the station glass. Several pathways to Ward 7 had changed color again. Security had increased priority on corridor control, lift routing, and environmental panels outside the quarantine line. Neri followed her out. If they classify him as restricted property, they can justify almost anything. "They can justify it on paper," Sela said. "That is not the same as making it true." Laura magnified the transfer file that had come with the patient. "Doctor, you need to see this." Sela leaned over the display. The intake path looked wrong now that she knew where to look. Timestamps were too clean. Recovery authority tags overlapped in ways they should not. One signature had been replaced and reinserted. Another had a security stamp layered over it. Older medical clearance. The more she opened, the more edits she found. By at least 2 departments, Laura said. Maybe more. The original chain is buried under revisions. Sela opened the patient transfer authorization. A black security layer sat over most of the source text. but beneath it she could still see fragments of older wording that had not been fully erased. Recovery witness count. External debris field. Survivor status uncertain. Containment not authorized. That final line had been crossed and replaced with transport under enforced sedation. Sela opened a private channel to the chamber. Jonah, listen carefully. Security altered your transfer record after recovery. They want legal cover. The station lights flickered once. Not enough to darken the ward. Only enough to tell trained people that someone had tested the power grid. Jonah sat up half an inch before pain stopped him. He forced himself through it and turned toward her. They will not cut the chamber first, he said. They will hit outer lights, surveillance, and side access. They want your team confused before they want me moved. Because if they think you can still walk, they will assume you are mapping the room? Sela asked. Yes. Laura brought up the side corridor layout. A narrow service turn lay behind the chamber, partially hidden by support columns and supply lockers, with a camera dead angle where the corridor bent toward the sterilization alcove. A heavy sound struck the outer door of Ward 7. Not a breach yet. A test hit. Oris returned over the main speaker, his voice clipped and cold. Dr. Vane, by order of station security, open all internal seals. Jonah spoke more quickly now, using what strength he had before the drug drag returned. Move your non-essential staff out of line of sight. Do not cluster near the chamber. When they hit the lights, they will want everyone looking at the wrong door. Neri stared toward the chamber. You want us to take tactical advice from the patient? Sela answered without looking at him. I am taking instructions from the only person in this room who expected the pattern. Outside the ward, another impact struck, followed by the low whine of a lock override starting and failing against the quarantine seal. Sela turned to her team. Laura, reroute every camera feed you still control to local loop. Make them believe we are holding center. Neri, move the portable med carts to the side corridor and kill the bright task lights. Hesman, take the 2 junior aides to the rear storage line and keep them behind hard cover. No panique. No shouting. For a second, they stared at each other across glass and light and too many unanswered questions. Then they moved. Sela made one last compromise. Neri stays in the chamber. I control the corridor ring. The first real breach attempt came 20 seconds later. The ceiling lights in the outer staff ring dropped to emergency low glow, and at the same time the main chamber door alarm chirped once, drawing every eye toward the obvious entrance. They're in the side turn, Jonas said through the chamber speaker. Laura obeyed at once. One door slammed shut, another slid open, and supply racks rolled half a meter for magnetic release to block the clean approach from the side corridor. It won't stop them, Jonas said. It will slow the first 2 seconds. 2 seconds is enough if someone uses them. 3 security officers came through low and fast in station armor, faces hidden behind clear masks and tactical shields. They did not look like men sent to escort a patient. They looked like men sent to take a position. 2 heavy supply frames rolled across the polished floor and clipped the front officer's shield angle just enough to break the stack. At the same moment, emergency curtains dropped from the sterilization alcove and forced the second officer sideways into the wall. It was not elegant. It was meant to break their entry shape before they reached the chamber. Jonah kept feeding the pattern between breaths. They were timing both entries together. Force the main team to commit before the rear line resets. Neri understood a beat later. He ripped the bedside monitor leads loose from the secondary feed and jammed the alarm sequence in a manual distress. A sharp medical warning tone filled the ward. From the corridor, the officers at the main seal reacted exactly as Jonah had predicted. They took the alarm as a sign that the ward was destabilizing and pushed their override harder, exposing themselves to the chamber cameras and to Laura's recorded loop, which now showed them clearly initiating forced entry into active quarantine. Sela drove forward from the side cabinet, struck the lead rear officer's shield edge, and shoved him into the locker frame before he could recover. Hesman and one of the aides slammed the sterilization door from the far side, splitting the rear team in half. The fight stayed short and ugly in the way all close station struggles did. There was too little space, too many hard surfaces, and too much risk of puncturing the wrong line or dropping the wrong panel. Sela did not try to overpower train security. She only denied them a clean route to Jonah. From the chamber, Jonah kept giving direction. Left corner blind now. The second one will swing wide. Kill the floor lights near the inner hinge. Laura obeyed. The side turn dimmed further. One officer misjudged the threshold, and his shin hit the inner rail hard enough to cost him balance. Sela drove him back with the baton before he could recover. At the main door, the breach never fully formed. Neri vented the decontamination mist into the entry gap, forcing the outer team to pull back or lose visibility. It bought only a short pause, but a short pause was enough. Ward 7 held. Security fell back to the corridor, not defeated but delayed. The side access seal re-engaged. The main door stopped shuttering under override pressure, and emergency lighting remained low. The whole ward smelled faintly of coolant, sterile mist, and overheated circuits. Sela stood bent over with one hand on the wall, catching a breath she did not want anyone to hear. Neri was back at Jonah's bedside, checking the strain that the noise and motion had put on his recovery. Jonah himself had not left the bed, but sweat stood along his brow and neck, and the effort of staying alert had drained what little color he had regained. Sela stepped back into the chamber. Now that the first forced entry had failed, the silence felt worse. It meant the people outside were changing plans. "I need the truth you can give me," she said. "Not all of it. Just enough." Jonah closed his eyes, and for a second she thought he had slipped under again. Then he spoke in a lower voice, as if each sentence had to be pulled through broken ground. "The ship you found me near was not transport. It was disposal." Sela said nothing. Jonah kept going. It carried personnel, records, and hardware from a program that was never supposed to surface. When something went wrong, they did not send rescue. They sent erasure. His mouth tightened. A flicker passed through him. Not physical pain this time, but memory arriving in fragments too sharp to hold cleanly. "Stress conditioning," he said. "Adaptive survival work. Human subjects placed in failed environments, failed systems, failed recovery windows. Not to save them, to see what still worked after everything else broke." Sela understood the meaning before she fully grasped the details. A hidden program had used human beings to study how much failure a body and mind could endure, and a survivor from that program had now reached her ward alive. Jonah opened his eyes again, and something colder sat in them now. Not drama, not rage, something flatter and harder than both. "My unit was what they called the part they could still use." Before Sela could answer, Laura's voice broke through from the outer ring. "Doctor, I have an inbound signal approaching from outside station range. No standard station tag. No dock request. It is running dark until the last second." Sela stepped out of the chamber and moved to the main display. A new contact blinked at the edge of the tactical map. Small, clean, and deliberate. Not drifting debris. Not trade traffic. Not rescue. A ship was closing on Vesper Ring, and Sela needed to know whether it had come to help the station or finish what had started in the wreck field. She stood at the display with Laura while the rest of Ward 7 checked seals, power, and the few medical system security had not yet managed to cripple. The contact on the outer map stayed dark for long stretches, then flashed just long enough to prove it was moving under control. It carried a technical rescue signature, but even Sela could see how thin the disguise felt. Laura shook her head. "It is using an emergency maintenance charter. The tag matches an old service fleet format, but the handshake is too clean. No cargo log. No crew roster. No dock service history." Sela looked through the chamber glass at Jonah. He had forced himself upright against the raised back of the bed. The effort had left his face drawn and pale again, but his attention remained sharp, fixed on the map rather than his own condition. She stepped back into the chamber and angled the display so he could see the approach pattern. What kind of ship comes in like that? Jonah barely looked away from the board. A ship that does not want to look like what it is. He traced a small arc in the air with one finger. Rescue asks early, loud, and often. This ship is holding useful distance until the last safe point. They want time to read station reaction, map entry options, and decide whether they can walk in under procedure before they switch to pressure. Sela kept her eyes on him. And what are they? A retrieval unit, he said. Professional. Not hired muscle. Not local security. The kind sent when a report says living evidence still exists. He finally looked at her. They came to recover what matters or erase what cannot be safely moved. Outside the glass, a low station tone rolled through the ward. Not a panic signal. A route priority signal. The incoming vessel had entered controlled range. Somewhere above them in the ring, docking crews and security command were already arguing over access, clearance, and who got to define the contact first. Sela opened a station command channel. When a response finally came, the voice on the other end sounded stiff and overmanaged. This is Dr. Selah Vane in Ward 7. I need the declared purpose of the inbound maintenance vessel. The answer arrived after a pause that told her someone was deciding how much to lie. Routine technical support transfer. No impact to medical operations. Sela stepped away from the panel. Then we stopped pretending this is only internal security. Neri looked between them. If that ship is real retrieval, then Station Command either invited it or failed to stop it. How far up does this go? Far enough that procedure is being used as cover, Sela said. Far enough that they think speed matters, Jonah added. Which means they are afraid of time. Sela looked back at him. Start from the part one need most. Why you? Jonah was quiet for a moment. The question clearly pushed against something harder than fatigue. Then he nodded once. There was a program. Officially, it never existed. Different names in different sectors. Same purpose. He swallowed and continued. Take people with unusual recovery profiles. Put them into failed systems, collapsed habitats, damaged ships, toxic atmospheres, low support, bad timing. Measure what breaks last. Measure what adapts. You were a test subject? Not at first. His voice roughened. At first I was support. Repairs. Field systems. Pressure doors, relay grids, life support patchwork, emergency routing. The kind of work you do when broken places still need to breathe. He pressed one hand briefly against his ribs. Then the project kept changing. People disappeared. Roles blurred. Surviving became a qualification. Sela followed the logic. They pushed the same people through repeated failure and learned from whoever stayed functional. Jonah met her eyes. My body adapted to staying useful after it should have failed. That is why your sedatives do not hold the way the chart says they should. That is why my recovery pattern looks wrong. He drew a slow breath. Your models assume a normal baseline. I stopped being that a long time ago. Neri lowered the scanner slightly. Fear still sat on his face, but now something else had joined it. Recognition, perhaps. Not of the method, but of the cruelty behind it. Sela asked the question that mattered most in her ward. Are you dangerous to my staff? Jonah answered without delay. Not unless I choose to be. And right now your staff are the only reason I'm still breathing. Before Sela could say more, Laura called from the outer ring. Doctor, I have a station-wide routing anomaly. Something is touching support systems outside our level. Sela moved to the main display with Neri close behind. On the board, several support lines had changed state. Not shut down completely. Worse, they were being adjusted in small, legal-looking steps. Vent priority reduced in one corridor. Oxygen reserve rerouted from one medical wing to another. Pressure differential altered in a maintenance spine behind diagnostics. Laura pulled up the affected zones. The changes begin outside outer docking and move inward through service control. Whoever is doing this is using station permissions in layers. Some commands come from security. Some do not. Jonah did not need long to read the pattern. If the retrieval team can touch support systems before they dock, then they already have a hand inside the ring. A softer alarm sounded from the side corridor. It was less dramatic than the earlier breach tones and more dangerous because it did not sound urgent at first. Hesman ran in, breath short. Doctor, reserve oxygen in the adjacent recovery wing just dropped below safe buffer. Not. Our room. South recovery. Sela's attention snapped to the neighboring zone. South recovery sat 3 corridors away and held post-surgical patients and long-stay cases who could not be moved quickly. If reserve oxygen fell there, panic would spread before collapse did. Laura added, corridor pressure between us and South Recovery has shifted. If staff rush through the wrong route, the doors will cycle slow. Jonah saw the pattern before Sela finished hearing it. They're not trying to kill the whole level. They're creating pressure points. Make your people leave Ward 7 to save others. Then take what they came for while you are split. That changed the priority at once. The new danger was no longer only Jonah in Ward 7. Now other patients were being used to pull Sela out of place. Sela turned fast. Laura, keep our cameras and seal controls local. Neri, stay with Jonah and keep him conscious if you can do it safely. Hesman with me. We go to South Recovery, restore air, and bring those patients toward heart support. No one travels alone. Neri looked toward Jonah. If you leave, they get what they want. Sela did not slow. If I do not leave, other patients pay for my choice now. Jonah spoke before Neri could again. Take the rear route through sterile supply. The main cross corridor will get slower with every pressure shift. If they are serious, they will make the obvious path feel almost safe. Sela gave him one long look. You say that too calmly. I would prefer to be unconscious and ordinary, Jonas said. That does not seem available. The dry line took a sliver of pressure out of the room. Then he went serious again. The people coming for me expect you to become predictable under medical pressure, he said. Do not give them that. The route to South Recovery ran behind Ward 7 through a narrow, sterile supply passage, then down a short connector spine where service drones usually moved linens, sealed instrument packs, and waste units. The emergency lights there glowed low amber. It was quiet enough that Sela could hear the distant groan of pressure doors changing state ahead of her. We move fast, not messy, she told Hesman. We restore air, stabilize the wing, and come back. When they reached South Recovery, the problem was already visible. Patients had been raised half upright by automatic bed response. A nursing aide was trying to calm them, and the wall vents clicked weakly with too little air moving through the room. No one was in immediate collapse, but everyone could feel that something was wrong. Fear would do damage before oxygen loss did if it spread. The console displayed a line that read, Override denied by station operations. Sela dropped to the lower maintenance latch, popped the access plate, and reached for the emergency bypass valves beneath the panel. This was the kind of work she hated doing under pressure. Too crude for medicine. Too slow for crisis. But the station had forced her there. She looked over her shoulder at the patients. The truth in one sentence. Air routing failed, and we are fixing it. Behind her, the room stayed tense, but did not break. The aide repeated Sela's words in a steadier voice than she likely felt, and Hesman pulled 2 support cylinders from a side rack and attached them to the weakest beds. Then Laura's voice hit Sela's earpiece. Doctor, the inbound vessel has attached at outer service port 9. No public arrival notice. Security channels just spiked. A beat later she added, too fast. We still hold local control, but only partly. Someone just opened a maintenance path behind diagnostics. That route does not belong to any station team I know. Sela finished the bypass, heard the air movement strengthen, and knew South Recovery would hold for the moment. That was enough to move. She and Hesman rushed back by the same sterile supply path, but the return felt different. The station had changed around them. Doors took longer to answer. Lighting shifted by section. A calm neutral announcement rolled through the spine about temporary service interruptions, using the same pleasant station voice that always appeared when something bad was already happening. When Sela reached the outer ring of Ward 7 again, she found Neri at the console, pale and angry. Jonah was no longer reclined. He sat on the edge of the bed with his feet planted on the floor, one hand gripping the rail to stay steady. Neri did not bother hiding his frustration. While you were gone, someone cut our backup oxygen link and tried to reroute chamber access through diagnostic support. We blocked it, but only just. Then they jammed the ward's internal comm loop for 19 seconds. Laura spoke from the mainboard. Turin is missing. That landed harder than the other alarms. Turin was one of Ward 7's quietest support techs, a dependable hand who knew the secondary corridors better than almost anyone on the level. He had been posted near the rear supply junction to warn of movement from the maintenance side. I had his locator until a minute ago, Laura said. Now it is moving toward diagnostics under a security escort flag that he never requested. The main speaker activated at once, as if the station wanted to prove Jonah right. Deputy Director Orris returned, but this time another voice sat behind his, lower and colder, speaking just one step from the channel. Dr. Vane, Orris said, you have reached the limit of your authority. Release Jonah Vale, and your missing technician will be returned unharmed. Sela had never heard that second voice before, but she knew immediately it did not belong to Vesper Ring. It carried the smooth control of someone who expected compliance, because he had seen panic work too often to doubt it. Every eye in the ward turned toward her. This was the decision point. Hand Jonah over and maybe save Turin, maybe reduce the pressure on the station, maybe end the siege around Ward 7. Keep Jonah, and everything could get worse. Jonah saved her the delay. If they have one of your people, they will keep taking pieces until the station bends. Sela looked at him. And if I hand you over? They erase the witness, he said. Then they erase the people who helped the witness. The channel stayed open, silent and waiting. The man behind Orris gave them no extra words because he did not need to. Pressure worked best when the target finished the argument for him. Sela spoke loud enough for the room and the channel to hear. We do not trade patience for threats. Ward 7 does not release him. Neri stared at her, fear playing on his face, but he did not argue. Laura closed her eyes for 1 second and reopened them with something like resolve. The line had been crossed. Lights dropped across half the ward. The rear maintenance seal flashed from amber to red. One entire section of the internal control board went dark, and on the outer map diagnostics access and supply support split from medical authority and shifted to hostile routing. At the same time, Turin's locator lit again and moved fast toward the diagnostic spine. Sela understood what that meant. The bargain had been false from the start. Refusal had not created the hostage. It had only removed the illusion that the hostage would be returned cleanly. Jonah pushed himself fully to his feet. He swayed once and caught the bed rail. Every movement told the truth his face was trying to hide. He was still injured, still recovering, and still in no condition for a clean fight. But he was done being the center of a room while others paid for him. I do not need to cross the station, he said. I need to move before they close every path. He turned towards Sela. They took Turin because they want you fixed in place. If I move, they move. If they move, they show me where to go. Neri stared at him. You can barely stand. I'm not talking about winning cleanly, Jonas said. I'm talking about pulling pressure off your ward long enough to get your man back. Outside the sealed door, something heavy scraped along the corridor, followed by the sharp click of a panel being opened where no station team should have been working. Black Archive was reshaping the level from the inside now. Every second spent debating only gave him cleaner control. For one moment, Jonah looked like he might fold. Then he found balance, drew a tight breath through the pain, and lifted his head. He no longer looked like a patient in Ward 7. He looked like a hunted man choosing motion because stillness had become worse. Sela moved with him instinctively, one hand ready at his side in case his legs failed. If we do this, we do it my way. She looked at the darkened control board, at Turin's moving locator, at the sealed ward she had sworn to protect, and at the man who had just decided to walk back into danger to save someone he barely knew. Ward 7 was no longer defensible. Her job had changed. Now, she had to get Jonah out of the ward, pull the original records from archive, then reach communications backup, and push the truth into the open before Black Archive sealed the story for good. The rear access alarm kept pulsing in a hard, red rhythm. Beyond it, metal scraped, locks cycled, and somewhere in the level of pressure, doors slammed with enough force to echo through the inner walls. Ward 7 was not about to fall in one clean breach. It was being cut apart in layers. Sela turned to her team. Laura, you stay here. Loop vitals, vent false movement through the chamber, and keep the front seal arguing with security for as long as you can. Laura nodded at once. For now, Sela said, keep the ward alive. If they break in, your job is not to win. Your job is to waste their time. Jonah steadied himself against the bed rail. We leave through the specimen path behind sterile prep. It does not look like an escape route, which is why it still matters. You know stations like this? Sela asked. I know service architecture, he said. Service first. Public routes second. Real control hides in the parts no one wants to look at. She keyed open the maintenance latch behind the sterilization alcove. A narrow panel slid aside and revealed a dark service tunnel used for sealed trays, waste cartridges, and lab specimens moving between medical sections. It was low, cramped, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and heated dust. We go through auxiliary medical transport, Sela said. First stop is archive storage on lower medical support. We need the original file. Second stop is the emergency broadcast node near communications backup. We need the truth out before they close the story. They slipped into the narrow tunnel just as the outer ward speaker came alive again. Dr. Vane, the unknown black archive voice said, you are out of choices. The auxiliary path sloped downward through the station's rotating frame, then turned toward lower medical support. The change in deck vibration told Sela they were moving away from the patient zones and into the working spine of the ring, where systems mattered more than appearances. Jonah kept one hand on the wall as they moved. He was slower than he wanted to be, and every few steps the strain showed in his breathing, but he never asked to stop. Sela did not offer. She only kept the pace hard enough to stay ahead of pursuit and careful enough to keep him moving. What exactly are we pulling from archive? She asked. Original intake path, recovery chain, medical overrides, erase transfer. Marks, Jonah said. Enough to prove someone changed the story after I was brought aboard. And if we get it, if we push that data through emergency medical relay, every clinical station on the ring sees it. If we get it past the ring, regional medical oversight sees it too. He stopped for 1 second and pressed his shoulder into the wall while a wave of pain moved through him. Then he continued. They're strong when they isolate one person, control the language around that person, and force everyone else to act through procedure. Once the real record is public, they lose the clean frame. That changed Sela's thinking at once. Until then, she had been trying to keep a patient alive inside a compromised station. Now she understood the larger move. Black Archive needed Jonah labeled, boxed, and removed before anyone outside security channels could call him what he truly was. They reached the first junction where the specimen path opened into a narrow technical corridor. Sela stopped just long enough to orient both of them. We are below South Recovery now, she said. We are leaving the specimen path and entering archive processing. We go there for the original file. Then we keep moving. Jonah leaned toward the corner and listened before they moved. No direct voices. One service drone, maybe two, but the left side corridor sounds open. They stepped into the technical corridor. It was stripped and functional, with exposed maintenance panels, low ceiling braces, and floor tracks for rolling lab containers. At that level of the station, the polished surfaces of patient care were gone. Everything looked built to work, not reassure. A service drone glided across the far turn, pushing a stack of sealed canisters toward specimen intake. Sela watched it pass, then led Jonah to a side hatch marked archive processing. She tried medical emergency priority first. This time the console displayed a line that read access delayed by station operations review. Jonah looked back down the corridor. That means they are leaning on the right systems, but have not locked the whole layer yet. Sela gave him a brief hard look. I run isolation medicine on a station that loves permission chains. Of course I can do this. She reached past the visible interface and tripped the manual quarantine logic that preserved access during outbreak containment. The hatch took 1 second, then unlocked with a sharp click. Jonah gave her a tired sideways look. Remind me not to underestimate hospital doors again. Inside archive processing, the air turned cooler. Rows of sealed cabinets ran along the walls, and a central sorter arm stood idle over a circular track where physical record cores and sample references could be moved between departments. The room was empty, but not untouched. Several drawers stood half open. Someone had already been there. My intake chain, Jonah said. Original, not revised. Search under Rec Recovery tags and Emergency Bio-Quarantine. Time window from outer debris intake to ward transfer. Sela opened the first drawer and found nothing useful. The second held equipment logs. The third stopped her cold. It showed the original recovery notation from the outer debris line. Survivor status provisional. Medical stabilization priority. No security seizure authority granted. Then the revisions began. One layer, then another, then another. Language changed from survivor to restricted subject. Then from restricted subject to war asset. Then from ward stabilization to controlled transfer under sedation. Sela copied the full chain into a portable med slate. Then she found more. Sedation escalation orders with no physician signature. A recovery note flagged and buried under security privacy. A blocked reference to project compartmentalization that had been mostly erased. This is enough to prove corruption, she said. Maybe not enough to prove the whole program. We do not need the whole program yet, Jonas said. We need proof the station is lying now. Sela slid the slate into the inner pocket of her coat. At that exact moment, the archive door cracked open and a loading cart rolled in under remote guidance. On its top tray sat 2 sealed specimen containers and 1 station baton. Jonas saw the shape of it first. Down. Sela dropped with him as the cart snapped its tray latch. The baton rolled off, hit the deck, and discharged a pulse meant to stun whoever stood nearest the door. It flashed across empty floor instead. Jonah looked toward the door and then toward the rear maintenance lot. They know we came here. They're still guessing which exit we prefer. Sela pushed herself up. Then we used a slower one. They left archive processing through the rear maintenance slot instead of the main corridor. That took them out of archive and into a supply cage lined with tool. Lockers, intake bins, and folded transport frames for sealed samples. Sela grabbed a compact seal cutter, a pressure mask, and 2 emergency med wraps from the wall rack without slowing. We are out of archive, she said. Now we cross the supply cage and head for communications backup. From the supply cage, they crossed into the medical centrifuge section. This was the next leg toward communications backup, and the floor vibration changed there, deeper and more mechanical. Tall round housings rotated behind safety glass, and narrow bridges crossed between processing pods. We are in the centrifuge line now, Sela said. Communications backup sits past this section and 1 more service stair. Jonah glanced upward toward a line of camera pods. 2 active, 1 false. She caught that at once. Meaning, the false one means the real observer is somewhere else. They crossed the first bridge just as voices sounded from the corridor behind the supply cage. Black Archive, or whatever skin it wore inside the ring, had found the archive room and realized their prey had moved again. Sela looked toward the second bridge. Can we outrun them? It does not need to outrun them, Jonas said. It needs to make them slow down and choose. At the second bridge, a warning tone sounded overhead. The console on the far post displayed a line that read section pressure adjustment in progress. Jonah looked at the narrowing bridge seals and the spinning housings to either side. They're trying to pin us between doors. Sela did not hesitate. She used her emergency medical clearance to force the section into temporary contamination transit, overriding the pressure shift with a false specimen hazard flag. The system accepted the lie because it still trusted her authority more than whoever was pushing from the shadows. They pushed through the centrifuge line and reached the service stair to communications backup. It was narrower than the main stairwells, with bare conduit walls and hard metal steps that hummed with relay traffic. Halfway up, Jonah finally stopped and bent over, catching himself against the rail. Sela looked back. Can you keep moving? He nodded without lifting his head. It means I can keep moving if you give me 10 seconds. She watched him breathe through the pain and did not fill the silence. When he straightened again, she said, when this is over, you're going back to a bed whether you like it or not. That earned the faintest hint of a smile. That sounds like a threat. It belongs to the next hour, she said. After that, it becomes your problem again. They reached communications backup and found the outer hatch sealed. Unlike archive storage, this one was not merely delayed by operations review. It had been actively flagged. The console displayed a line that read, "Route reserved for security intervention." Jonah looked over his shoulder toward the stair below. They know the node matters now. Sela forced the outer hatch with emergency medical authority tied to station integrity review. After 2 failed attempts and 1 manual reset, the lock gave way. Inside communications backup, the room was compact and ugly, built to function after cleaner systems failed. Relay stacks lined one wall, emergency transmit panels sat under shielded glass, and a local broadcast share faced a center console surrounded by outdated interfaces few people probably remembered how to use. For one bright second, it looked like they had won the step they came for. Then the black archive voice came through, closer than before and no longer filtered through station courtesy layers. Dr. Vane, Jonah Valley, you have forced this beyond private recovery. The main board shifted to an external map of Vesper Ring. Several rings of the station were marked in pale warning color. Not medical, civilian habitation, market corridor, dockside sleep quarters, public transit loops. Sela stared at the display. Are you threatening civilian sectors now? Not threatening, the voice replied. Prioritizing. If Jonah Vale surrenders, emergency strain remains limited to medical security zones. If he does not, support routing for non-essential sectors may fail to receive timely correction. Sela's hands curled against the console edge. You call that containment because it sounds cleaner than extortion. For a long second, the only sound in the room was the hum of the relay stacks and the distant vibration of the ring underfoot. Jonah spoke quietly. They will hurt civilian systems just enough to make command freeze. Then they will offer one simple exchange. He looked at her. Me. He stepped closer. Sela, listen to me. If they widen pressure beyond medical, you lose the station. You lose public trust. You lose anyone willing to resist openly. That is exactly what they want. My solution is to stop them from spreading this to people who never chose it, he said. Sela turned to face him fully. That is not a solution. That is surrender packaged as mercy. Her voice sharpened with the anger she had been holding back. You think they stop once they have you? You think the station becomes safe the moment you hand them the last witness? No. They clean the scene. They reward the people who cooperated. They bury the rest. Jonah held her gaze. He looked exhausted, injured, and more alone in that moment than at any time since she had met him. Maybe, he said, but if I stay here, they make the ring pay first. Sela looked back at the loaded file on the console. They had the proof. They had reached the node. Black Archive had simply changed the terms the moment they sensed the truth might escape. It was the oldest move in power. Shift the battlefield the instant the other side starts to breathe. No, she said, quieter but harder. I'm not accepting a choice designed by them. The warning map remained on the screen between them like a blade laid flat on a table. If they want control of the story, she said, then it ends here. The truth was loaded into the relay. Black Archive was closing in. Sela had only one way left to win. She had to keep the broadcast alive long enough for the station to hear it, and Jonah had to pull the retrieval team away from the node before they took the room. The communications backup node sat one level above the pressure ring that fed the medical sectors around Ward 7. That mattered. The relay room had one clean entrance, one maintenance slot, and a narrow service passage that curved down toward the pressure control loop. Jonah saw the shape of the space immediately. They will hit this room hard once they realize I will not surrender cleanly. If they breach here, you lose the broadcast. Sela kept one hand on the relay board. And if you leave this room, I lose the patient I am still trying to keep upright. Jonah pointed toward the service passage. The pressure ring below us is narrow, segmented, and full of timed doors. The retrieval team will try to keep formation and move fast. If I pull them into that loop, I can break their rhythm and buy you time. He was not leaving to fight for glory. He was leaving to draw the pursuit out of this room so the relay could live long enough to fire. Sela hated that the plan made sense. She turned back to the relay board and forced the archive package into live emergency formatting. The system rejected the first command and accepted the second when she paired it with medical crisis authority and station integrity review. Data bars began to move across the screen. The console displayed a line that read, Emergency Clinical Relay Preparing. Jonah moved to the hatch, opened the lower maintenance panel beside it, and killed the corridor light strip outside. The stairwell beyond the door dropped into softer gloom, lit only by red emergency markers and pale status bands along the rail. Before Sela could stop him, he slipped through the side service passage and headed down toward the pressure ring below communications backup. She watched him go for one brief second, then forced herself back to the relay. This was the real choice. Trust the man she had refused to hand over, or lose everything by trying to hold him in place like a patient when he had already become something else. Dr. Vane, the Black Archive commander said, open the hatch. You are obstructing a lawful recovery. He struck the hatch once from the other side, not to break it yet, but to let her hear the certainty behind the force. Your station security chief already understands the difference, he said. He knows what happens when order fails. Below the relay node, Jonah reached the pressure ring and took position behind a maintenance rib where the corridor narrowed into a half circle around the medical flow regulators. He knew the type of space. It was built for systems access, not for teams moving in tactical lockstep. One person who understood the timing could turn it into a choke point. He knelt only long enough to catch one hard breath, then reached for the emergency access plate on the first pressure door and switched the cycle to alternating manual assist. That was the first part. No clean sweep through the loop. Each door would now answer a little slower and not in identical rhythm. The console displayed a line that read, Medical Ring Variance Detected. From above, he heard the relay hatch shudder again. They were still leaning. On Sela. Good. That meant they had not yet realized where he had gone. He stepped into the center of the ring, just long enough to be seen by the first camera still under partial station control, then moved back into the bend where the walkway narrowed near the regulator housings. The first two Black Archive operators entered the ring from the upper access, moving low, clean, and fast. Not station guards. Jonah had been right from the start. Their formation told the whole story. One shield front, one support angle, both prepared to sweep and isolate. The lead operator raised one hand. Jonah Vali. Stand down. If I were going to obey that, Jonah said, this would have been a much shorter night. The shield operator advanced. The second man split half a pace right to preserve angle coverage. The side seal between them and the upper ring tried to close on its new delayed timing. The support man had to check his stride to avoid taking the edge of it on the leg. That tiny break was enough. Not enough to win. Enough to disturb. Jonah kicked a loose maintenance cart into the narrow lane ahead of the shield line. The cart was light, but in a confined ring it did not need to hit hard. It only needed to force another step change and break the clean advance. The shield operator shoved it aside, but now the second man was half a beat off and the door behind them had closed fully. Above them, more boots hit the upper access. Sela heard the sound through the relay floor and knew Jonah had succeeded in one thing already. He had pulled them off the hatch. She opened a channel to Laura and Neri, hoping one of them still held a working line. Static answered first. Then Laura's voice broke through in fragments. I hear partial security channels in conflict. Oris is losing command control. Good, Sela said. I'm about to give him a reason to lose the rest. She opened the emergency relay and routed the archive evidence to every medical console on Vesper Ring, with escalation copies toward regional clinical oversight. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the console displayed a line that read, Emergency Clinical Relay Sent. Sela leaned into the station relay. This is Dr. Sela Vane of Ward 7. I am issuing an emergency integrity notice. The patient identified as Jonah Vale was recovered alive from the outer debris field and reclassified after admission through altered security records. Original medical intake has been attached to every licensed station console. He is a living witness under unlawful retrieval pressure, not a lawful transfer asset. Any further attempt to seize him is now on the record. She did not know how many heard it, but she knew enough did, because within seconds, three things happened at once. Across the station, medical boards woke with the file. In the pressure ring, Jonah heard the relay and knew the outer frame had turned. And the retrieval team, below communications backup, lost the one thing it needed most. Silence. Jonah ducked through the maintenance slot beside regulator housing 3, a gap too tight for a shielded advance. The support operator tried to circle around the longer path. Jonah hit the local release for the inner service panel and forced another segmented door to close between them. He knew how trained retrieval teams moved. They protected secrecy as much as the target. Once exposed, they rushed to end the scene, but they also became more dependent on command signals. That meant hesitation at every unexpected change. A third figure entered the ring from the upper access. Jonah recognized him before he saw his face clearly. Not from name, from bearing. Calm under exposure. Direct line movement. A man who believed pressure was cleaner than force because it made others choose the ugly thing for him. The commander spoke plainly. Last offer. You come with us, and civilian sectors remain stable. Continue this, and every failure from this point becomes your decision. Jonah shifted 2 steps deeper into the ring, toward the narrowest point near the old pressure manifold. Then, come take me. He did not try to beat them straight on. He gave ground in measured steps, forcing them to commit to the lane between the manifold housing and the emergency pressure trunk. Their shield line could only hold single file there. Their support angle collapsed. Their pace became predictable. A maintenance curtain dropped from the ceiling, not dangerous by itself, but perfectly placed. It split the lane with a heavy clear wall and cut the shield man off from his support by 2 body lengths. The operator behind him had to go wide and lost direct view. Jonas stepped in, struck the shield edge with all the force his injured body could still lend, and turned the first operator sideways in the manifold rail. Again, not to overpower him, only to break shape. The operator's shoulder hit the housing hard enough to jar his grip. Jonah used that second to drive past him and trigger the opposite door cycle. Then he led the commander into the inner pressure arc near Ward 7 support loop, the tightest segment in the whole ring. He wanted them there for one reason. The corridor was narrow enough to break formation and slow pursuit, and every second they spent untangling themselves was one more second for Sela's relay to spread. Every door there opened on a stagger. Every sightline bent at the wrong time. Every move required trust in the system map. Jonah had read enough of the station from the moment he woke to know how that trust would fail under pressure. A pressure seal began to close to Jonah's left. He slipped through it at the last safe moment. The commander lunged after him and had to shorten his step. That single adjustment threw off the 2 operators behind him again. Once more, the formation died in the corridor. By then, the relay had already begun doing its work. Security channels divided. Some seals remained under hostile routing, and others flipped to review hold. A priority note appeared from internal compliance, demanding verification of the altered patient record. Oris had lost the legal cover that had made the seizure easy. Laura's voice came through stronger now. Doctor, public sectors received the file. Medical Guild relay confirmed. Security teams are being ordered to halt any transfer until chain review completes. Then Neri cut in on a local line full of static. Sela, I hear movement in the pressure ring near Ward 7. Jonah dragged them back toward us. That told her exactly what he was doing. He was bringing the fight to the one place on the level where his first observations still mattered most. Sela ran. When she reached the upper lip of the pressure loop, she saw it in one glance. Jonah in the inner arc near Ward 7 support. One black archive operator recovering from a broken advance. One trying to reform. The commander still pressing forward because he believed persistence could fix a damage pattern. Nary, Sela, said into her earpiece, trigger the ward decontamination cycle on my mark. The commander saw her and understood the danger too late. He tried to signal retreat. Now, Ward 7's decontamination vents fired across the support loop, not as a weapon, but as a dense white suppression mist that filled the narrow arc and destroyed clean visibility. The black archive operators lost sight of Jonah at exactly the moment they needed it most. He had already seen the distances. Door, rail, manifold, vent post, inner ladder. He shifted through the fog and hit the emergency lock on the rear access behind the commander. The door slammed shut. The remaining 2 operators were sealed on the far side of the arc. A new station voice broke across the corridor, sharper and less controlled than Oris had sounded all night. This is Vesper Ring Interim Security Review. All off-station retrieval authority is suspended pending investigation. External unit at Service Port 9 is ordered to stand down. Medical custody of Jonah Vale is recognized until formal hearing. The commander stopped. He could no longer claim seamless station compliance. He could no longer pull Jonah out under legal cover, and he could no longer erase the record faster than the record spread. Security officers rushed into the outer ring moments later, but now they wore Vesper Ring colors openly and kept their weapons low. That difference mattered. They were not there to seize a hidden asset anymore. They were there to contain a scandal that had escaped its handlers. One of them stepped forward carefully. "Commander, you are under station hold pending external review." The man did not resist. He looked once at Sela, once at Jonah, then said nothing at all as they took him. The 2 black archive operators in the far arc were disarmed and separated. Their perfect formation had ended in a place too narrow to save it. The crisis did not vanish all at once after that. Civilian sectors still needed routing restored. South recovery still needed stable reserve flow. Ward 7 systems looked as if they had survived a controlled storm. But the core fight was over. The relay had changed the field. Once the truth reached medical systems and oversight channels, the people chasing Jonah no longer had secrecy, legal cover, or the first move. The station could no longer pretend Jonah Vale was a war asset, delivered for lawful retrieval. By the time the medical level settled into something close to order, several hours had passed. Ward 7 remained sealed for repair, its outer boards scorched by override attempts, and half its local control tree stripped down to emergency use only. Some doors had to be opened by hand, the chamber lights worked on backup routing, and the whole place looked tired. Sela stood in the recovery room beside Jonah's new bed while Neri checked the latest scan. Turin sat 2 rooms away under observation, exhausted, shaken, but alive. No one treated that detail lightly. It had been earned. Neri lowered the scanner at last. "You need rest, both of you, and I would like for once to give that instruction to people who listen." Jonah lay back against the raised bed, more still now, because the danger had truly passed and his body had finally claimed its debt. "I'm trying very hard to appear cooperative. You fail in a very disciplined way," Neri said, then left them alone with the nearest door open. Sela moved to the side table and checked the latest message stack. Requests already lined up from Station Review, Medical Guild Oversight, External Investigators, and 3 separate departments that had apparently discovered their principles now that the record was public. She sat at last and felt the tiredness settle through bone and thought alike. "I chose my side before I knew enough." Jonah looked at her. "You chose against a machine that wanted your patient to become paperwork." He held her gaze for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost the hard edge it had carried during the siege. "No one has done that for me in a long time." Sela looked past him through the repaired glass, where Ward 7's inner chamber waited under work lights and patch seals. Bruised, functioning, still standing. "You were right about one thing," she said. "This ward was never only a ward once they brought you here." Outside, a service team rolled new filter housings toward the damaged corridor. Farther down the level, someone laughed in brief, exhausted relief. The sound was thin but real. Life returning in fragments. The ring doing what stations do after crisis. Continuing because there was no better option. Jonah watched her for a moment. He looked less like a cornered survivor now, but not yet like a man who knew what safety felt like. "You're going to keep digging." "I'm a doctor," she said. "It is one of our professional gifts." Later, long after the emergency teams had rotated out and the public sectors had stable air again, Sela stopped once more at the main archive board before ending her shift. The copied records from Jonah's case had already been mirrored into protected review storage. Nothing in them could be quietly rewritten now. As she prepared to close the console, one buried reference caught her eye. Not a full file, Just a fragmented tag attached to one of the older erased revisions, half damaged and not yet restored. It was only a trace, but it was enough to say one thing clearly. Jonah had not been the only name in that program. Somewhere beyond Vesper Ring, in other locked rooms, dead archives, and forgotten transport lines, there were almost certainly more survivors still buried under heavier dust. That was what made the night feel larger after it ended. Saving Jonah had not closed the wound. It had only proved the wound reached farther than anyone in Ward 7 had known. Selah shut down the console and stood for one last second in the dim archive light. Ward 7 still stood. Vesper Ring still turned above its dying star. But after that night, nothing inside the station would ever feel quite as quiet again. Selah understood that now in a way she had not before. She had started the day as a doctor protecting one patient in one sealed room. She ended it changed by the simple fact that one rescued man had cracked open a larger silence. And that silence almost certainly covered other lives still missing. Because once the truth is spoken out loud, it does not go back to sleep. And somewhere out there, beyond the steel corridors, beyond the locked archives, beyond the reach of men who bury what scares them, there are still other names waiting to be found. That was what made the final discovery more frightening than the siege itself. Jonah was not the end of the story. He was proof that the story had happened more than once. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel the weight of that silence and the cost of breaking it, please like this video, share it with someone who loves powerful science fiction, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival, truth, and the fight to remain human in a cold galaxy.